The San Francisco Bay Area is home to over 7 million people and growing. The 9 counties surrounding the Bay are projected to add another 2.1 million people by 2040. Meanwhile, Bay Area residents have demonstrated a strong urge to protect its natural beauty, which is what attracts so many to live here in the first place. The question is, how can the Bay Area best expand development for a growing population while continuing to protect its wealth of biodiversity and natural beauty? With population continuing to explode in the Bay, the need for housing is also increasing. It is estimated that over 187,000 new housing units will need to be built by 2022. Over 40% of that housing is needed by those with very low and low incomes. So what is needed is not just housing, but sustainable development for those living between 0 and 80% below the area's mean income level. The Bay Area is considered a biodiversity hotspot with numerous rare and endemic species, as well as 128 endangered species. Since the 1850s, the Bay has lost about 95% of its original wetlands, but that remaining 5% accounts for 90% of California's remaining tidal wetlands, an important stop for migratory birds on the Pacific Flyway. The Bay continues to lead on conservation of its open spaces. Of the approximately 4.3 million acres surrounding the Bay, 1.2 million acres have been protected. However, another 1.24 million acres have been converted to other uses, and another 400,000 acres are threatened with development in the next 30 years. With these statistics in mind, we set out to discover the best locations around the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay for both development and conservation. Our methods included splitting up our inputs into 3 categories: conservation, development, and conservation and development. We chose remaining wetlands, endangered species locations, and critical wildlife habitat as areas weighted toward conservation. Areas weighted for development included low environmental justice score locations, priority development areas, and EPA Superfund sites. Planned land use and vegetation type inputs were further classified as either conservation or development areas, depending on categories such as open space or commercial residential areas. For our method of analysis, we chose to use a weighted raster overlay. First, we weighted our feature inputs as +1 for conserve, +1 or -1 for both conserve and develop, and -1 for develop. The feature inputs were then converted to raster data and added together with a raster calculator to produce a final map. And here is the final result. Looking at the overall pattern of the map, there is a trend toward development in the densely populated areas close to the San Francisco Bay and near other major population centers. And this makes sense since the priority development areas layer we incorporated is geared towards placing development close to sustainable modes of transportation in order to meet the Bay Area's greenhouse gas emission targets, while also factoring in income and housing needs. It's interesting to note how Superfund sites and areas that receive the lowest environmental justice scores are also areas most in need of development and housing. Conversely, priority conservation areas are mostly concentrated in the more remote areas of the Bay surrounding major population centers. In order to better visualize the most high priority conservation and development areas, we subtracted the values closest to neutral to produce a map showing only the highest scoring areas for either development or conservation. Again, you can see a similar pattern of recommended development near population centers surrounding the Bay and conservation in the more remote areas surrounding them. Focusing in on particular areas, we see that parts of San Francisco, and especially the cities of San Pablo, Richmond, Emeryville, Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro in the East Bay, stand out as areas most in need of development. In the South Bay, development is most needed in the cities of East Palo Alto, near Mountain View, Santa Clara, and San Jose. The area that stood out the most significantly in terms of the need for conservation is located in the North Bay, west of the city of Vallejo. The highest conservation index score we found in the entire Bay Area is circled in blue, east of Skaggs Island and San Pablo Bay National Wildlife Refuge. This area is indeed a biodiverse and rich wetland that supports many endangered bird species that were included in our endangered species layer. In conclusion, we believe our results show that we should continue to preserve open space in areas surrounding population centers while focusing on sustainable development in areas where population density is the highest and there is access to sustainable transportation. This strategy will ensure that urban sprawl is kept in check, which will keep our air cleaner and keep us on track to lower our greenhouse gas emissions. And that important wildlife habitat and biodiversity is protected while still providing much needed housing and development where it is needed by those who need it most. However, it should be noted that those people living in areas that are subjected to the lowest environmental justice scores based on pollution and environmental hazards should not be further burdened with the pollution from construction, which is why we recommend affordable, sustainable housing. We believe that if populated centers grow up and not out, we can preserve the natural beauty of the Bay while continuing to thrive economically.